everybody, this is Emily from Hopscotch Interactive, and I am also the AUREA Award Ambassador. And I'm here with Frank Govaere, who has been a jury member at the AUREA Award for the last 4 years, since the very beginning. And I wanted to get a few minutes to chat with Frank about his amazing background, learn a little bit more about him. As a jury member, you get to talk to everybody in the decision room, and we get to know you at the conference here at Europapark and at the AUREA Award. But I want to hear more about Frank, and I want you to hear more about Frank because he has an incredible, career path that he's taken, and I think a lot of you will get something amazing about it. So thank you, Frank.
Thank you. So yeah, I started out in very classical animation. I studied animation, and at that time there was very little or no digital elements in animation. It was all hand drawn, and I started working in that, but I soon found out that there was things that you could sort of partially digitize with the means that we had back then, and that's how I started to get into paperless 2D animation, 3D animation, visual effects, and during my time when I was working at UFA, which is the largest production company here in Germany, and it's also the oldest, it has like a track record of something like 105 years or so by now, we started to develop a lot of technology, but also content for virtual reality. The content that we developed, because it was very close to the DNA of filmmaking, is volumetric video, where you actually capture people in a specially designed studio. And the thing is that you don't just have a flat image, but you have like a real 3D image of people where you can actually walk around. So it's not like stereoscopic film where you get like a small shift in perspective or a sense of depth, but it's really, they become 3D objects that you can place in a virtual world, and you can walk around it. We used to call it the walkable film.
And how long ago was this that they started doing this with you at UFA? How many years ago do you think that was?
That was about 5 years ago that we
Okay.
started this. One of the first projects we actually did was a virtual reality experience for the occasion of 100 years UFA, which was a very short thing, because at that time we could only record like 5 or 6 minutes in one go.
And is that because of the storage capacity of the hard drives?
Yeah.
Okay.
The whole thing is captured by 32.6K cameras, and they generate about 2.5 terabytes of information per minute. So
2.5 terabytes of information per minute 6 years ago or 5 years ago.
Yeah, and it still does that, but
Okay.
a few years later we were already able to capture about 90 minutes in one go, and that is what actually enabled us to do longer formats as well. So we weren't just doing short clips, but we were actually doing longer formats.
So 90 times, am I getting the math right? 90 minutes times 2 terabytes, 180 terabytes on one single take, like a 90-minute take.
Yeah. So
that's mega.
Yeah, you need like fast hard drives to do it, and you need like glass connections to get everything sorted out. So that made us really independent what length was concerned. So we were wondering what we could do with that kind of opportunity that we had, and then one of the engineers of the Fraunhofer Institute, they were also involved in development of this technology. He said that he had a connection of a very old family friend who was a Holocaust survivor, and we thought it would be a great opportunity to basically let him tell his story, and because he was actually going around schools telling his story for the last 30 or 40 years, but he was getting older, and many people who actually witnessed that time of our history are slowly but surely disappearing
Yeah.
one by one. So we thought it would be a great occasion to have that level of detail in his statements that he made, in what he was saying, because it would be actually the best way to preserve his testimony that he was making.
What was his name? Or what is his name?
His name was Ernst Grube,
Okay.
and he used to be a teacher, but he's been retired now for several years. But he still goes around schools, and he actually made it a point of telling his story to young people.
Yeah.
And I was amazed by the way he was telling his story, because he tells it in a very neutral way. There is like no bitterness in his voice, or he's not blaming anybody. You know, he's basically just saying what is happening. He's almost like a very neutral journalist of his own story.
Wow.
You know, so that makes it. I in the beginning, when I was talking with him, I thought that would make it maybe a bit too cold, maybe a bit too distant. But in a way, it's actually even more emotional, because he sticks to the facts and he doesn't add anything, you know. And he also talks about good things that happened to him during that terrible time. Like he met other Jewish children when he was in a home for Jewish children, and he was saying that was actually not a bad time in his life.
And also, just so if anybody's watching and they're unclear about the period of time that we're talking about Nazi Germany, 1938 to 1945.
Exactly.
From Kristallnacht to the end of the war, right? So, and he was a young boy at that time.
He was a young boy.
Okay.
He was in a mixed marriage. Like his father was non-Jewish. His mother was Jewish. And it's a very sad story, because basically the family was torn apart. He and his older brother was sent to first to a children's home for Jewish children. Mm-hmm. His mother was sent to a concentration camp pretty soon, and his father was just left behind. You know, so.
His father, who was not Jewish.
He stayed behind in Munich, and he was trying all the time to basically get his family back, but he also had to be very careful not to basically be too critical about the whole system. So, and from that, at some point they closed down the children's home, and they also sent him and his brother to a concentration camp, and that's when things got really rough for him, and that's where the story gets actually very, very, morbid and very dark.
So I want to ask you, because you said that this was something that you started at UFA, but I believe that you also ended up getting some support from the city of Berlin, or from the media.
At some point, I left.
About who helped you finish the project?
Yeah, at some point I left UFA, and the project was still there. We had these hundreds of terabytes of
thousands, I bet.
on a hard drive somewhere, and nothing happened for about a year and a half, because processing that data is actually what costs the most money. It takes a lot of processing power to do it. And we had figured out that it would cost a lot of money, which we didn't have. But then we talked to Fraunhofer Institute. We said, you have to make us a deal on this, because we really want to get this going. So I talked to the...
Wait, wasn't it millions? I think you said it was going to be millions of dollars to process it, based on their normal structure?
On their normal rates, it would have costed us 900,000 euros.
Okay, right.
And so I talked with the people from Media Board in Berlin-Brandenburg. They are people that sort of give grants for film and TV, but also for new media projects. And they'd agreed to give us 100,000 euros to basically finish the project. So I talked to Fraunhofer and I said, look, you guys, you need to do it for 100,000 euros. And the reconstruction of the worlds was also something that still had to be done. And so I had some former colleagues from UFA who decided that they would pitch in their free time to finish it. And then it took us about another 4 to 5 months, and then we finally got it finished.
And is there a title for the project? What did you say that it was the Gruber story, or how did you? What did you end up calling
the German
it?
title is Ernst Grube das Vermächtnis, which means Ernst Grube, his legacy, basically.
Okay.
And it was a very emotional moment when he first saw himself in this 3D world, because he was basically meeting his digital twin, and he wasn't involved in the project. Also, due to COVID-19, he was not involved in the project for 2 years or something. He didn't travel a lot. So as soon as it was possible for him to travel again, we brought him to Berlin and we actually showed him the project. But it was very difficult for him to watch, because he got very emotional seeing himself in that world, and we had made reconstructions of the places where he had been, and it was too real for him.
Yeah, I bet.
So
Wow.
he didn't watch more than 5 or 10 minutes of it. So, and then he went like, I have to stop. But a lot of people actually have watched the experience by now, and we were afraid, because the whole thing is now about 60 minutes long, and we were afraid that it would be too long for people, because people don't like to have VR goggles on for that long.
Yeah. Oh, and we should say that it is something that you are watching in VR.
Yeah.
But it can be watched also 2D, or no?
You could also watch it 2D on a web browser or something like that. So it's not really stuck to any platform. But people actually do watch it for like 60 minutes with VR glasses on, which is amazing. It's of course it's difficult, because at the moment we have 4 setups in the memorial in Sachsenhausen. They only have 4 sets of VR glasses, so it's only a few people can see it every day, which is a bit of a shame. But on the other hand, it doesn't make any point to make an MTV edit out of this whole story. It would take away from the story. So we decided to let him tell his story in full, and because he already did it so many times in different schools and different places, he did a really good job.
And we're showing some B-roll
Dieses
here of
Kinderheim
the footage,
ein
so
Ort,
that people can see
an
it,
dem
and
ich,
they can get a sense
das erste
of
Mal
the
jüdisches
imagery that
Leben
you created.
kennengelernt
And
habe.
so
Du musst
I
dir vorstellen,
wanted to make sure that people know that
du
if they
bist 5
want
Jahre
to
alt,
see this now,
6,
it sounds like they
6 Jahre,
can see it at the
hattest
Sachsenhausen former concentration camp,
Ein
which
Ort,
for
an dem sie
those who
forschen,
don't
die
know, that was located
KZ-Gedenkstätte
just north of
Sachsenhausen.
Berlin.
Junge
So it
Menschen
was one
hier
of the
auch mit
first
neuester
deportation
Technik
sites
erreichen
for many of
ein
the Jews in
zentrales Ziel.
Germany, or in Berlin specifically. So you can go to Sachsenhausen, and you're currently looking for other places to show it, but it sounds like you, from what I understand, as part of the deal, it was now a Creative Commons license, right? So
yeah, that was part of the deal, because so many people have basically put their time in, and some public money went into it. So we feel that nobody really owns this IP. That's not the reason why it was done, to generate commercial IP or something like that. It was actually made to preserve at least one of these stories.
yeah.
And I think we can only preserve it if we share it around. If it's going to be on some hard drive at some production company, then it will get lost again.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is we want to make it available, and we want to basically spread it around. And the general idea which we had in the beginning, but that was maybe a bit too ambitious, because it's a non-commercial project and it's very hard to get funding, was because the whole thing is set up like a road that he has taken. The whole user interface is basically one road, and the idea is that we would have several roads of several witnesses of that time, and maybe they could even cross, because a lot of these stories basically end up being in the same place. So what we really wanted to do was make like a whole web of these kind of stories, but that would probably cost us a fortune to do it. And as I said, it's not a commercial project, so it's not difficult.
Yeah, it is. It's difficult to have passion projects that you know you need to do, but you might not have the funding for. But I'm still so impressed that you not only started the project at UFA and that you were using volumetric video and volumetric capture to document something that you knew was temporary, and that one of the benefits, I would say, from a technology standpoint was that the story is now something that's preserved forever in volumetric video, which as we move into future generations, we want to preserve these stories in the most realistic way from the people that told them, and this is going to help you sort of preserve and document that into the future. And maybe when he's no longer sharing the stories himself, he can be sharing this as his as his 3D volumetric,
as his legacy. That's why we called it that way, because he also said that when we were talking, he's not saying this in the statement he's making, but he's saying this in interviews we had with him off camera. Basically, he was saying that he's getting older and older, and it's getting more and more difficult for him to do these visits to schools.
Yeah.
Actually talking with people. So for him, it's the second best option, to actually have that experience that people could just watch.
I think that's amazing. Well, thank you, Frank. And I am here again with Frank Govaere, who is a veteran visual effects creator and has an amazing history in his time working at UFA and Studio Babelsberg, and also working on this volumetric capture documentation of Ernst Grube and his legacy. So it's amazing to sit down with you. Thank you so much. And I am so excited, I guess, and looking forward to seeing where this project heads, and also maybe you will be able to create that web, that story in the future if we can support you with funding and find ways to make those connections for you. And I think that would be amazing.
That would be amazing, yeah. It could be work for the next 10-15 years.
Yeah, it really could. All right, well, let's hope that comes to be, because that would be incredible. And thank you so much, Frank. I'm so glad we got to have this chance to talk today. And thanks, everybody.
Ich bin in München geboren. Mein Name ist Ernst Grube. Geboren bin ich 1932 in München als Kind einer jüdischen Mutter. Unsere Mutter, Clementine Grube, ist in der Nähe von Darmstadt geboren, in einer sehr religiösen Familie. Ihr Vater, unser Opa, war koscherer Metzger. Sie selber ist...
Wie war das für dich so in dem Heim? War es für dich ein schlimmer Ort oder ein...
Nein, das Heim war unheimlich wichtig. Wenn ich heute nachdenke, ja, ich habe ja schon erzählt, dass wir zwei, der Werner und ich, die Ruth war ja noch Baby, ja, nicht religiös erzogen wurden. nicht jüdisch erzogen wurden, so war dieses Kinderheim ein Ort, an dem ich das erste Mal jüdisches Leben kennengelernt habe. Du musst dir vorstellen, du bist 5 Jahre alt, knappe 6 Jahre, hattest wenig Kontakt mit Kindern, wo du gewohnt hast. Und jetzt kommst du in ein Haus, da sind 40 Kinder und die sind alle nett zu dir und die Betreuerinnen sind nett zu dir und du kommst in eine Umgebung, was deinem jugendlichen oder kindlichen Leben irgendwie einen neuen Inhalt gibt.
Also war es eigentlich auch eine Art Oase zur damaligen Zeit, kann man sagen?
Naja, man kann es nur als Oase unter dem Gesichtspunkt sehen, dass ja der Druck der Nazis auf die jüdische Gemeinschaft, auf die jüdischen Menschen, dass der immer größer wurde, dass die Verbote immer konkreter wurden. Dass also den Juden die Wohnung genommen wurde, nicht nur wir jetzt, sondern auch später anderen Familien. Und dass die Angst der Juden nun vor der Macht der Nazis durch den 9. November, durch den Pogrom, durch die Reichspogromnacht, die die Nazis Kristallnacht genannt haben, dass der so enorm wurde, dass das Bestreben der Juden nach Sicherheit, nach Geborgenheit und nach Auswandern immer intensiver wurde. Und wenn man diese Umgebung sieht, dann ist unser Heim ein Refugium, sage ich mal, eine Insel. Ist auch eine Insel. Aber auch eine Insel, die schon auch von außen her gestört wurde. Wir haben dann von außen her die Nachbarskinder, die teilweise in unserem Alter waren, teilweise älter, die mitbekommen haben, dass in diesem Haus Juden wohnen. Und die haben uns dann, wenn wir das Heim verlassen haben, als Judensäue betitelt, haben uns angespuckt, haben uns verspottet. Also das ist dieses Äußere, dass ich jetzt doch etwas älter geworden, 7, 8 Jahre, aber doch von der Brutalität, sage ich her, was das ja eigentlich war, brutal, doch noch nicht verstanden habe. Und dann war das Kinderheim, und dann bin ich gleich mit dem Gedanken fertig, dann war das Kinderheim und die Betreuung durch die Tanten immer eine heilsame Geschichte, sage ich jetzt.
Wir befinden uns hier im Volocap-Studio in Babelsberg und wie ihr hier sehen könnt, ist es kein normales Studio. Es ist ein volumetrisches Filmstudio und wir werden heute mit einem Zeitzeugen des Holocaust, mit Ernst Grube, einen volumetrischen Film drehen. Der Film wird später Das Vermächtnis heißen. Wir werden euch jetzt einfach mal ein bisschen hinter die Kulissen mitnehmen und euch zeigen, wie so ein Dreh vonstatten geht.
Mein Name ist Ernst Feiler. Ich darf als Director Technology der UFA dieses Projekt hier verantworten. Gleichzeitig bin ich bei diesem Projekt Ernst Grube, das Vermächtnis, der Produzent, zusammen mit dem Oliver Schreer vom Fraunhofer Institut.
Wir nehmen ja hier mit 32 Kameras in diesem volumetrischen Studio auf und können dadurch eben sehr realistische, dreidimensionale Modelle der Person erzeugen. Und die kann man dann in eine virtuelle Szene oder für Augmented Reality dann verwenden.
Im volumetrischen Studio zeichnen wir eigentlich nur die Figuren auf, also die Menschen, die Personen. Später werden die dann in die virtuelle Realität in eine Welt platziert und diese Welt, die fertigen wir an in 3D. Zum Beispiel werden wir bestimmte Teile der ehemalige Lebenswelt von Ernst Grube werden wir rekonstruieren. Wir werden zum Beispiel den Garten vom Kinderheim werden wir nachbauen, indem er uns dann erzählt, wie das Leben im Kinderheim war.
Ich bin Hauptperson, würde ich mal sagen, dieses Films, wobei ich einen Interviewpartner hatte, der das auch recht gut gemacht hat, sodass wir beide hier doch erfolgreich, glaube ich, diesen Tag hinter uns gebracht haben.
Ich hatte die Ehre, den Ernst Grube über seine Erfahrungen im Zweiten Weltkrieg und im Holocaust zu interviewen.
Mein Bestreben ist, durch meine Zeitzeugentätigkeit das bekannt zu machen, was nun unter der Nazizeit an Verbrechen, soweit ich es erlebt habe, passiert ist.
Der alterstechnische Kontrast war natürlich sehr stark. Das hat das Ganze auch besonders gemacht, dass man so zwei ganz verschiedene Generationen hat. Ich bin 16 Jahre alt, Ernst 87. Und ja, dass man da eben diese zwei verschiedenen Perspektiven hat, fand ich sehr cool.
Nicht zuletzt ist auch die Frage der Zeit eine entscheidende Frage heute, weil die Aufnahmekapazität begrenzt ist und wir in kurzer Zeit möglichst viel aufnehmen wollen und möglichst viele Informationen haben wollen. Und das ohne professionelle Schauspieler, sondern mit den beiden Protagonisten heute.
Wir sehen diese Produktion heute als einen Piloten. Wir hoffen, dass dieses Konzept für die Ausbildung in den Schulen, aber auch in Museen und Gedenkstätten ein sehr überzeugendes und ergreifendes mediales Konzept ist.
Ich glaube, dass es ein sehr wichtiges Projekt ist, dass wir eben diese Erinnerungskultur beibehalten und dass das aus dem Bewusstsein der Menschen auch nicht verschwindet und dass wir eben auch weiter von der Geschichte lernen.
Das Besondere an dem Dreh heute ist, dass wir eigentlich mit dem Dreh selbst Zeitgeschichte schreiben, weil wir das erste Mal einen Überlebenden des Holocausts in einer völlig neuen Art und Weise festhalten.
Am Ende ist es wie bei jedem Proof of Concept, wenn das tatsächlich funktioniert, möchten wir natürlich so viele Zeitzeugen wie irgendwie möglich hier in das VoloCap bringen, um so viel wie möglich von ihren Geschichten und ihrer Persönlichkeit auch für die Nachwelt und die nächsten Generationen zu erhalten.